Good morning, everyone. Can I remind you all that this meeting is being broadcast live over the internet, so we are all on camera. Please be aware you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking, and please remember to speak clearly into your microphones. This meeting is available to view online now and in the future, wherever people want to watch it. We welcome the use of Welsh language at our meetings. I have had no request for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. I'd like to welcome everyone attending the meeting today and anyone watching via the webcast. Please can all mobile phones and other noisy devices be put on silent. If there is an emergency alarm, follow the green signs and go to the ground floor of the Civic Car Park. Agenda item 1, attendance and apologies. Chris Slade, have we had any apologies, please?
No, Chair, we've had no apologies today.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Members, are there any apologies you know of? Okay.
Chairman, Cathy Evans.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Move on. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Justine, do you have any advice for members, please?
Thank you, Chair. Members, as you know, it's your responsibility to make declarations, but in any case, I can't see how anyone would have any declarations to make in relation to any of the reports today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Justine. Members, do you have any interest to declare? No? Okay. Agenda item 3. Page 3, minutes of the previous licensing committee, 10th of May 2018. That's on page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6. Can someone move the minutes are correct? Okay, we all agreed? Yeah. Thank you, members. Okay, we go on to agenda item 4. Page 11, minutes of the previous licensing hearings. That's on page 11, 12, 13. Can someone move that the minutes are correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. We'll agree that. Thank you, members. Okay. Agenda item 5, page 47. Quarterly report update. Alison Hughes, could you please present us a report? Sorry.
Yeah, page 19, Chairman.
Sorry, Chair. There's other minutes to go through.
Oh.
So if you go to page 19.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I missed that one, did I? Right, okay. So, minutes of the review of premise license hearings held at the Civic Centre, Pontypool. Okay, so page 19. Can someone move that the minutes are correct?
I'll move those.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
23. Page 20.
Yeah, I haven't got that one on my thing. On page 23, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Page 23, 24, page 25, page 26, page 27. Yeah, we're all agreed, yeah? Okay, thank you, members. Make sure there's no more now. Yeah, page 35, yeah? So minutes review, premise license hearing held at Civic Centre. Okay, page 35, 36, 37, page 38, and 39.
Chair, can I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Can we confirm the date that revoke comes into force?
If I could just speak on that one, they have an appeal period, and I can confirm that we have received an appeal on that one. They continue to trade until that appeal is determined.
Thank you.
Mr Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are you happy with that, Nick?
Yes,
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no problems. Okay, so agenda item 5 then. Quarterly report update. Over to you again, Alison, please.
Super, thank you. This is a fairly standard format of our quarterly report, but it's just updating you on the latest trials and tribulations of the licensing team for the first quarter of this year, i.e. April to June 2018. If we just go into then the alcohol and the operational matters and alcohol and entertainment, we've outlined that we've had 8 complaints in relation to licensed premises from members of the public, including things like immediate withdrawal of DPS from the licence, a couple of complaints about noise, nuisance and public disorder, and we've also had an alleged underage parties. All have been resolved through words of advice or letters or warning letters. We did have one premise that was visited by the police on 5 separate occasions in a 3-hour period. However, what was determined was that was actually the bar staff calling the police in because they were concerned about what was happening and they were trying to keep control of the situation. So although that appeared quite serious, what it was them keeping control of that situation to make sure that problems do not occur. We had objections to a temporary event notice from the police and environmental health because they believed that allowing the premises to be used in accordance with the temporary event notice would undermine the licensing objectives, particularly in respect of the prevention of public nuisance. Both requested that this be taken to the Torvine Safety Advisory Group prior to any future submission, although the timing on this one precluded that on this occasion. What's actually happened is that they actually did come back with some further suggestions on how they could manage the event. The event then went forward and we didn't have any problems reported, so that was resolved in that way. In all, we've had 12 representations during the period to 6 applications for premises licences, all being made by one or more of the responsible authorities. It's been a very busy period in respect of the applications. But all of those representations have been resolved by working with the applicant and having conditions placed on the licence, etc. So what we've done is altered their application or had conditions placed so that we could resolve those representations. We've had one premise that hadn't paid their annual fee, but that was actually paid following an intervention by the licensing officer. We do still have 2 licences still suspended, but they've been closed for a number of months. And as I've said before, what happens is if they reopen and then the new person going into those premises is liable for any outstanding fees. Licensing officers have done 2 ion track testing operations with the police during this quarter. 4 premises were tested and minimal issues were found, which is good news because we have found problems with drug use indicated by this testing in the past. So what we've done is we've just given advice in relation to the prevention of drugs misuse. Correspondence in relation to the prevention of underage sales was sent to all licensed premises in the Blaenavon area, and that was leading up to the Blaenavon World Heritage Day, and that's because we'd had complaints in previous years of underage sales. Visits were also undertaken by the licensing officer and the police to premises trading during the day to discuss that with them. And as I said, that was following a request from local councillors in respect of previous problems. The licensing officer has also done 7 joint visits to licensed premises with immigration enforcement officers. We found 2 premises where there were individuals with no right to work in the UK. Those investigations are ongoing by the Home Office and we're waiting to be updated on what the Home Office intends to do in relation to those cases. But what happens is the immigration officers that we go out with, they report it to one office who determines whether a fixed penalty notice should be issued, and then it goes to another office which determines whether further action should be taken, such as requesting a review of the licence. So it would be a while before those came back to us. In April of this year, a review hearing took place in relation to an off-licence, and that was supported by the Home Office Immigration Enforcement Service, following the discovery of a male working at the premises, no legal right to work in the UK, and that's one of the reports that you've seen the minutes of previously at this meeting. I think the interesting thing was that at the hearing, the panel made the decision to revoke the premises licence, and as I've just said, there is an appeal period. They have now submitted that appeal, and they can continue to trade. I believe that appeal now is mid-August for the first hearing. So I think that is moving ahead, and we will report back on what happens with that one. I think it's interesting for us because this is one of the first that we've dealt with. So it's a learning curve for all of us in how this progresses. So as I said, I'll report back to you as soon as I can on that. Are there any queries or questions on the alcohol licensing? What we mean by the immediate withdrawal of a GPS from the licence is the GPS can apply to be immediately withdrawn. And in fact, I've just dealt with one this week where somebody was retiring, the paperwork hadn't been done, so she contacted this department to withdraw herself from the licence, so from when she ceased working. Now, what normally happens is that the company concerned puts in the application for a new GPS before the old GPS leaves. Doesn't always work that way. And the other thing is that sometimes there's an argument going on at the premises, and those are the more difficult ones to achieve. And to work around, because what's happening is somebody's walking off site before we can get someone else in there. The issue here is that the presence of a GPS is a mandatory condition on the licence, and as soon as the GPS leaves, then they're in breach of the licensing conditions if they continue to sell alcohol. Now, what would happen in these cases is that we immediately contact the licence holder and let them know what's going on. And from that point, there are two things that can happen. They can either say, yes, we know that's going on, and we're going to stop the sale of alcohol until we can get ourselves sorted out. And that's actually what's happened recently. They made that offer. Or they say, no, we've got a new GPS coming in. We will put in an interim application, and we can actually process that very quickly then to make sure that the new GPS comes onto the licence. So what we do is we work very quickly with the licence holder, but to find a way round to make sure that they remain that they're either legally trading or not trading in alcohol.
Thank you. Okay, Glenn, any other questions or comments, members?
Okay, then so if we move on to the Hackney and private hire licensing, we've had 11 tax-related complaints from members of the public this quarter, relating from things like plates that have fallen off, inappropriate comments by drivers, luggage left on the side of the road, things like that. All have been investigated and most were resolved informally, either there wasn't anything there that was a problem, or the driver or the vehicle owner has been advised and has actually put things right. We've had a couple of complaints relating to the taxi rank in Pontypool. This is an ongoing issue, very much for us, and we acknowledge that there are issues there with private vehicles parking, delivery vehicles parking there, etc. It's right in the centre of town, and a lot of people park there to go about their business, but they're not actually allowed to. Responsibility for enforcement continues to be a police matter at present, because you know that civil parking enforcement is coming over to this authority, but the police have retained responsibility for that until we can get the legislation adopted that gives us the powers to do that, which we're now expecting in the autumn. So officers are therefore working with the police, doing joint visits wherever they can to get them to do that. But that is fairly limited in what they can do and what we can support them on. But we're hoping that when it becomes a matter for this authority that we can review that, and we are in discussion with the Highways Department on that matter. So that's all tied in with other things. We did have a major investigation around a vehicle that was acting as a private hire vehicle, but wasn't licensed to do so anymore because it was too old. Do you know that when vehicles are overweight, we look to stop licensing them? So this is one that was quite elderly, although it was still in reasonable condition. What was happening was the owner was using an exemption, or thought they were, in relation to their public service vehicle operation. And quite a few of our operators have this, would have a public service vehicle, the larger minibuses and buses, and then they have their private hire operation. There is scope within the public service vehicles to have a small number of private hire vehicles as part of that operation, and wouldn't then be licensed as private hire vehicles. But what we've determined is, as they were both, that actually this vehicle should have been licensed as a private hire vehicle and was no longer so, and that has now been resolved, and the vehicle is off the road. But it did take a while to get into the legislation and to actually determine what was the most appropriate way forward with this vehicle. Lastly, we've reported in the past that we're doing a report on a private hire operator. I'm pleased to report that's now progressed. The Chief Officer has considered the report, and it'll be coming to a panel in due course. Okay. Are there any queries or questions on the Hackney carriage licensing? I think the rest of it are a little bit more straightforward. Gambling, gaming and lotteries, we've had no complaints from the public, and there's been very little activity at the beginning of the year. That tends to pick up as and when we can through the year. Smoking in enclosed public spaces, been no smoking complaints. We've had one non-payment of a fixed penalty notice that's being progressed to prosecution at the moment, and we'll report back on that in due course to let you know how that gets on. Of interest to us at the moment is that the Welsh Government are consulting, and that's until the 17th of August, if you want to have a look and respond yourselves, on the smoke-free premises and vehicles Wales regulations. What they're looking to do is to update those regulations to meet current standards and to reflect the experience of enforcing the previous legislation. And that the impact on licensed premises will be limited, although hotels, etc., could lose the option to have some smoking bedrooms, which they're allowed to at the moment. Changes to the definition of smoking shelters could also affect some premises, and particularly our pubs and clubs, requiring them to alter or move their current smoking areas. And that's going to particularly affect some that have the smoking areas very close to a wall, and it's where you count that wall as a wall. If it's that close to the smoking shelter, we actually say, well, that's a wall, and it counts as part of the smoking shelter. But if it's a little bit further away, when is it a wall of the smoking shelter, and when is it not a wall? And that matters because the smoking shelter has to be 50% open. So if you've got a wall, if it's right against the wall, that affects how we work out that 50%. there is actually quite a lot of guidance on that, and with little ways that you can work it out and little sums you can do, so it is quite complex. And for those, as I said, for those pubs and clubs that have put their smoking shelter right against the wall, that could affect them. But it will also affect some of our future issues with those pubs and clubs, because if they now have to move them down the beer garden, for example, they're going to be potentially moving them closer to residential properties. So this is one that we're looking at in the future to see how this develops. We're also looking at how we enforce this. It looks as if the enforcement for most of this will still remain with local authorities, and in this authority we share that with the Food, Health and Safety team, so we do the licensed premises and they do other premises. However, they're looking to introduce legislation around schools and hospital grounds where smoking will be banned other than in smoking shelters, or for hospital grounds, not for schools. And I haven't seen anything there on how that's going to be enforced and who's going to do the enforcement. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops, because as with any enforcement, it isn't ever going to be on a full cost recovery basis, and that's, with resources on enforcement coming under increasing pressure. So that'll be interesting, to say the least. Are there any queries or questions on that at the moment?
Any questions, members?
Okay, so moving on to some of the other things that affect us. Street trading, we've had a couple of complaints. We did have a bit of an issue with ice cream vans going around the area and not being not having street trading consent with us, which we're now chasing up. We've got some applicants that have applications have come in now and are being considered and being consulted on. We've had nothing much on the charity collections. They've come in and are working as normal.
On the charity collections, I know of one particular area where they have one of these banks, one of these metal boxes, and the metal box is not being emptied by the charity, and people are just dumping bags around, and then people are going at night looking to see what's worth and what's not worth taking. They're just chucking it all over the place. Where do we stand with the enforcement of these charity boxes to actually be emptied?
That actually rests with waste management. And it could also be an environmental matter. The charity collections that are licensed by the charity team are where people are rattling boxes for money under your nose. And those are the only ones that we are really involved in. Although we do also look at where they collect clothes. So if where, for instance, some of the charities are specifically asking you to leave clothes out, and some of those aren't really charities, that we would become involved in the enforcement of those. But in terms of the recycling, that would be dealt with by our waste management teams.
Unfortunately, when we contact the waste management team, they say it's nothing to do with them. It's to do with the licensing people, because they look after it, so there does seem to be some confusion there.
There does, but it doesn't come under our legislation. We do street collections, we do charity collections and house-to-house collections. And that's the legislation.
To actually inform the waste people about that, because they are adamant it's nothing to do with them, it's your problem.
Very well, yes, I'm happy to look into that for you and to go back to them on that. They have to pass our desks to get to the kettle, so we do see them on a regular basis, and we can in fact hold them hostage to fortune if they want a cup of tea. So I think we can deal with that quite easily. We do work next to them, so we see them on a regular basis. Okay. Moving on then to scrap metal, we just had one complaint, although we didn't actually find there was any activity there that would fall within legislation when we looked. Moving on to animal establishment licensing, no complaints in this quarter, although we are still getting applications coming in for home boarders. We might even be about to get our first breeding licence, which, that legislation's been in for a good few years, but quite a few of our premises that we know are breeding dogs do not fall within the legislation, which is that they have to 3 or more breeding bitches. I think the interesting thing, and something that I'm going to be reporting to the next committee on, is in terms of the new animal establishment legislation that's adopted in England, but isn't coming into play in Wales. It's England only. And that's going to it's not going to affect the premises that are licensed per se, because that would have been a very big job that they didn't have time to do. What it does do is it invokes a more modern understanding of what premises fall within that criteria. So, for instance, it makes very clear that things like day boarding of dogs and home boarding of dogs fall within the dog boarding criteria, although we already do that here, and most local authorities already do that. But I think that the more interesting and concerning thing for us is that it brings in new licensing conditions. Now, these are the conditions that any premises that we license have to meet. And we've updated ours reasonably recently on an all-Wales basis, the Animal Health and Welfare Panel did a lot of work on this about 7 years ago. What's happening in England is that's all being brought into this legislative process controlled by DEFRA and working with local authorities, trade associations and animal welfare charities and the vets. So it's a very, very big, well thought out and involved process. But it's replaced a number of the other mechanisms in England that were being used to update the licensing conditions. Here in Wales, the mechanism that we've had has been overtaken by events, and I'm not aware that there is any programmed review process that's going on. And of course then there is the opportunity then to have different licensing conditions in England and Wales, and we do have national organisations that are licensed here, or some that belong to trade associations that promote national standards. So once we have full information on what's going to be proposed, and I had that information because I was on the working group, and I'm going to wait for it to become public and say that that is actually what's going to happen, because we may actually find that what actually comes into play is a little bit different. But once that happens, I'll be coming back to this committee to suggest that we adopt the English model licensing conditions. And what will happen then is that we will be the same as all of the English authorities, and also that we will be able to follow their updating process rather than have to worry about it ourselves. So that's what I'm going to be suggesting on that. Unfortunately, it does mean that we can't bring any of the other changes in. We don't have that mechanism within the legislative framework that we're still working on. So we can't do risk-based inspections, and we can't actually increase the licensing to 3 yearly for the better premises, which means that the better premises in England will be paying less for their licenses. But we don't have scope to change that at the moment. But at least we can make sure that the standards they meet are the same. Okay. Are there any comments on that one?
Members? No?
Okay. So moving on to just some of the more general matters, service requests. We're doing slightly better on recording these now, so you will see numbers going up, and it isn't because we're doing more, it's because we're actually showing it better. And that's going to be important when we come into fee setting, because we need to show the work that we're doing in order to charge for it. But for this quarter, we've got 70 service requests recorded, and that's across a wide range of, taxi licensing, how do I apply for a licence, things like that. We did have 11 freedom of information requests, 3 in respect of taxi issues and 8 in respect of animal establishment licensing. and I'm actually waiting for the moment where we have had more animal establishment freedom of information requests than we have licences, and I think that we will get to that point quite shortly. In terms of the overall workload results, the proactive inspections haven't been very high in the first quarter of this year. We've had a number of complaints in that have been that we've had to deal with. New licence application levels are slightly higher, but we are hoping to pick up the inspections and other proactive work as the coming months pass. The other difficulty we've had is the specialist database. You'll be aware that we changed over our database in order to save a considerable amount of money. I think it's fair to say that, as with anything to do with computers, that's not gone as smoothly as we might have hoped, although probably not as bad as we feared, but there is still a bulk of work that we have to do, and we've got an officer putting time aside now to try and get that done. So there is going to be an impact on that. One issue that we have had on the database change is that the time we take to process applications, we can't currently report on that. In fact, the system we're now using is better on reporting overall, so we're hoping that we're going to be able to change how we're recording things so that we can go back to reporting to you, but not at the moment. We're not set up to do that. So that's it in terms of the workloads. Are there any final comments on the workloads and what we've done?
I'd just like to thank you, that's all, for all the work you do with the limited resources. You've got a shrinking team for shrinking, and just, well done, and thank you for everything you put in, you and your team.
Thank you. I'll pass that on to the officers. I'm sure they'll appreciate that. Right, moving on to management matters. I think we've just got a few bits here, but nothing majorly outstanding. In terms of the Constitution, I think that's still with the legal team to take forward. We've got a few bits that we are going to have to consider, and with this committee as well, over the coming months. In terms of policies, you previously asked me to look at sex establishment and charity collection policies, and I've begun that drafting work. I've said that that'll be ready for your consideration in the autumn, but having looked at how much I'm going to be reporting to you in the autumn, I'm probably going to put that report back now to January. I think you've got quite a bit to do at the next committee meeting without that one. In terms of fees, we've got the gambling fee report coming to you today, and we're looking at the other non-statutory fees and to be reviewed and reported for consideration later in the year. In fact, I and my colleagues have done quite a bit of work on that this week, so we're really beginning to look at how we bring those together, and we might need to be talking to you even at the next committee about how you want to take that forward, what places you want to be thinking about, how you charge people. Are we going to be charging people the full cost recovery no matter what? Are we going to be trying to be more business friendly by looking at our fees and making sure that they are appropriate, and also how do we use our fee structure to encourage people to apply for licences, because chasing non-licensed premises is actually expensive and we don't get any money for that, so it might be better sometimes to charge less and get some money in and get them within that regulatory regime than to leave them outside and trying to hide from us. So we will be having that discussion later in the year. In terms of the collaboration, I don't think anything much is changing on that. I think it is working very well, and particularly in terms of service resilience. And we've had a few instances where officers have had an interest in a premises where we're getting in a complaint, and somebody from the other authority has been able to investigate that. So that's working quite well. A bigger issue for us in this quarter is that we had 4 complaints against service, which is unusual for us. None of those were substantiated on investigation, and all of the people concerned have been informed of that. One related to a licensed premises and was linked to a much wider complaint about another team, and in fact we just got the tail end of a very big complaint that came in. In fact, there was, when we investigated, in fact, we had bent over backwards to help that person and to make sure they weren't disadvantaged in any way. I think that it may have been linked to the fact that the business was struggling and the fact that business has now closed. The other three relate to taxi matters, and that does relate to other actions being taken by the licensing team, which we'll report on in future months. In terms of the overall performance of the team, we've attached the report at Appendix A, and it just shows that we are still quite busy. And I think it's not only the quantity but the quality. I think some of those complaints have been quite complex complaints that we've been dealing with, and they have taken some time. So that's the end of that report. Only remains to ask whether you have any further questions or queries you want to raise at this time.
Okay, members, any questions, comments at all?
No.
I think it was a very thorough presentation, and commend Alison and her team for the work that they do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Okay. So the recommendations are on page 52 of the agenda to note the activity report for the first quarter and the comments on its content. So 11.1. Recommendations that the committee note the activity report for the first quarter and that the committee note and comment on the contents of the report. So can I have someone please move? Yeah. Yeah. So can I have a show of hands then? Okay. Thank you, members. Recommendations are agreed. Agenda item 6, page 59. Gambling fees. Alison, can you present the report for us, please?
Well, thank you, Chair. Moving on to gambling fees, this should be hopefully fairly straightforward because we did a lot of work last year on the gambling fees, and that report was brought here for your consideration. And this is really looking at just the annual review of those fees and to discuss how that's worked and whether any changes have occurred as a result. I'm going into the background just for your information and just to help you recollect that we have a statutory duty under the Gambling Act 2005 to set the fees, and these are for the betting shops, tracks, adult gaming centres, family entertainment centres and bingo premises. Other things like just the gaming machines in pubs, etc., those are set by the Gambling Commission. We don't have any power to alter or change those. So this just refers to the ones that I've named there. Looking at the issues and findings, then what I've done is I've just covered some of the types of licence fee that we've looked at. And there are quite a few things that we have to consider when looking at fees in terms of the application fee, the first annual fee, how the annual fees are set, and then we've got other things like variations, transfers and copies of licences, etc. So we have to work out all of those. The regulations stipulate a maximum figure for which we're permitted to charge, and if we go over that figure, we're not allowed to charge our cost recovery. We can only charge the maximum fee. So if you look at Appendix 1, what I've done is I've listed in column 1 of that appendix the maximum fees that we are permitted to charge. We currently license 13 premises under the Gambling Act, where the fee charged is determined by the authority, and we've got 9 betting premises, 2 bingo premises and 2 adult gaming centres, and all of them will be required to pay an annual fee. As I said, the alcohol licence and game machine permit fees are determined by government. So the fees that we're charging these at the moment for new applications, variations and the annual fees for the existing premises, that's shown in column 2 of Appendix 1. When calculating the new licence fee costs, we've got a number of bits of legislation and guidance we have to adhere to. The provision of services regulations 2009 is the big one, and that actually lays out what local authorities should and shouldn't include. We've also got guidance from the LGA, Open for Business, and we've got other legislation as well, and guidance, and a case law, and particularly Hemmings versus Westminster. Interestingly, gambling is excluded from the services regulations, but what we're saying is that if we don't do it the same way, we could be criticised and we could still be open to judicial review. I think the only real difference is that we don't have to specify the application fee and the enforcement fee separately. And that's quite a bit of work on the other fees where we do have to do that. Because for some other licences, people have to pay the application fee and are only liable to pay the enforcement fee once the application has been approved. So moving on then to the direct and indirect costs that we can charge for. As I've said here, it's the implementation costs, and that includes the cost of developing the policies and setting the fees, etc. It includes the direct staff costs, including the one costs of travel, training, and anything linked to those officers, but also the management costs of senior managers, running the committee, things like that. So there's quite a few other things that are directly linked to the licensing process that we can charge for. We can also charge for the indirect costs, such as the fact that we have to have the general management functions, such as the chief executive, we have to have a legal department, HR, finance. We have to have all of those in place in order for the service to exist. We also have specialist equipment costs, and particularly our specialist IT databases, and for some things we have third-party costs as well for inspection and enforcement. So we have to bring all of those things in when we calculate our fees. What we did is we assessed these all very fully in 2018 when the licence steps and average time taken for each step, including development of policies, etc., were calculated. And what we've done this time in order to update these costs is we've taken the following steps. The licensing steps and average time taken for each step, including the development of policies, have been reviewed for accuracy. Other costs, such as IT costs, have been reviewed to make sure they remain relevant. And in particular, the change in the database and associated pro-rata cost savings have been taken into account. In fact, we haven't got a saving this year because the cost saving we would have had has been put into the data transfer and other work. But from next year, businesses will benefit from the fact that we're saving that money. And we've also looked at the officer hourly rate and on-costs, etc., and that's in conjunction with the finance teams. Working from that, we've calculated our maximum fee that we can charge based on our costs, and that's in column 3 of Appendix 1. So that's our cost recovery sum. But what I've done then is I've worked out which ones are above and below the maximum fee, and that's what we're allowed to charge. And what we've done is I've put that then in column 4 of Appendix 1. So that is our full cost recovery up to the maximum that we're permitted to charge, and then rounded down to the nearest pound for ease of application. The calculated charges are minimal, although some costs have increased around data entry with the new database system. This has been offset by streamlining of some of the underpinning costs, such as management and policy development. And I think in particular when we looked at the policy development, fee setting, etc., this year, because we've done a lot of the work, we've been able to better assess what time it's actually taking and to just downgrade that a little bit so that, it's fairer to businesses. What we've done then is look at how these affect businesses. As I've said, for most of our betting premises, it's going to be no change because we were already charging the maximum permitted fee on an annual fee. For bingo and adult gaming centres, those have gone up by just a pound. What's actually happened is for some of the annual fees were slightly higher than others. But in fact, when we're sending letters out reminding them, etc., and when we're telling people what the fee is, I took a decision that it was quicker and easier and therefore a cost saving for us to just have one annual fee level for those premises. But I can't charge more for some than what we've worked out, so I've gone down to the lowest. And it just means that I'm only having to do one letter to 4 premises instead of 2 letters and having to faff around. It's well worth it for the cost saving, but it does mean that for those premises they're seeing almost no increase. So that's where we are with that. As I've said before, we're not actually obliged to charge the maximum that we've calculated. If you think that in hindsight, going on from last year, that actually we are charging too much, you have the right to reduce those fees. Just as long as you understand that if you reduce one, you can't then increase someone else's to cover that. That does have to be met out of the general budget. And, you know, you may think that's appropriate if you think that, you know, it's too high, it adversely affects small businesses, or it deters businesses from becoming licensed. Because, of course, as I said, if we deter businesses from becoming licensed, we're then having to investigate unlicensed premises, which is difficult and time-consuming and therefore costly. So that's where we are with those, and that's the end of the report that I have to make today.
Thank you, Alison. Members?
I just want to clarify with you, because I'm on a committee of a whole, so we've got to clean as they got put that as an interest before voting on anything about the increased fees. So I'm on the account with Millennium Hall, and they've got a bar and everything, so I just wondered if we voted now on the second report with increased fees, whether I should declare an interest in that, whether actually on a community hall committee.
No, Councillor, because it's a community hall, so it could be a personal interest depending on what goes on at the hall. It's not going to be prejudicial.
That's great. I thought I'd better clarify it just in case somebody picks up on the webcast. Say, hold on, he's on a committee. So yeah, that's okay. Thanks.
If perhaps I could come in here and remind members that some of the licences for gambling, some of the fees are not set by ourselves. I don't think any of the fees that we're talking about for existing premises would fall to yourselves, not unless you're running a betting shop, and it's unlikely that any community halls would wish to go down that route. So I think that this should be fairly straightforward.
Councillor Cowan?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for pointing out that you are correct, that in my rush to get this to yourselves, I've put in the wrong fee. In fact, the proposed fee from August 2018 should read 903 for bingo premises, adult gaming centres and betting premises track licences. It should read 750 for family entertainment centres and 600 for betting premises. I've put that in the report on the table. I showed where I was charging people, but thank you for pointing out that when I was changing everything down to 903 from whatever it was before, I was a little over enthusiastic in making those alterations. Thank you.
Sorry, Nick.
Yes, just a quick question, if I could, on Appendix 2. Would you like to make some comment about the proposed costs and the differences between the relevant authorities as to why there's great discrepancy?
I think it's interesting. I put this in because I was doing this for Blair and Gwent. You always ask this question, so I put it in because I thought you'd probably be interested as well. And I think the answer is that different authorities have very different ways that they sometimes that they calculate even something as basic as the hourly rate. Now, for ourselves and Blair and Gwent, we try to do this in the same way because it's me doing it, so the advice I've given to both finance departments has been the same. But even then, we've come up with different figures. And what then happens is that that affects things greatly, but also some of the timings vary, so that some things, if you're travelling a long distance, take longer than if something's just down the road. So from Monmouthshire, for instance, they're going to be travelling quite considerable distances to get to any of their inspections. And also, when you look at the work that we discussed with you in terms of our workloads, that can vary as well. So the example that we said that we would be inspecting our gambling premises once in the year, but a lot of that is around discussing some of the impact assessments and some work that's ongoing, whereas other people might think, well, if they've got a problem in an area, they're going to be doing 2 inspections or perhaps more, or they get more complaints about those premises. We get no complaints really here, whereas other authorities do get a lot more complaints. So all of these things come in, and they can radically affect the fees that are charged. Now, back in what I would call the good old days, the way that I and other licensing managers would set fees, and this is back in 2003, for example, so 15 years ago when I was first doing the Licensing Act, and I was first in charge of the licensing regime for a lot of things. The way that we set a fee would be to look at what everyone else was charging, and to say, well, if Monmouthshire are charging that and Caerphilly are charging that with their rich authorities, we want to be charging a bit less than them. And but Blair and Gwent, that's a poor authority, we might be charging a bit more than them. And we'd actually do it like that. Or members would actually want to know that we were charging the average, or they'd ask us to make sure that we weren't charging more than everybody else. So, and then there were things that actually sometimes we used it to discourage traders, and that's a different matter altogether. In fact, that's gone now, and we're not allowed to do that. We're obliged to look at our own costs. But I thought this was interesting to see just how it can be very different, and I know that is something that I'm going to be taking back to the other authorities to say, okay, we're doing all of these calculations, we're supposed to be doing it in the same way. Why are we coming up with those different figures? I would just say that there is due to be some guidance issued as part of the animal welfare legislation on how these things should actually be calculated, and that is the new guidance that will be issued by DEFRA shortly. I can promise you that my fees have been worked out the same way because I wrote that guidance. So I would say that I'm very, very comfortable that what we are doing is in accordance with best practice. And I think that other people, I would say that it's the other authorities that need to look at whether they're charging enough and not too much.
Chair, could I come in at this stage? Just to add to what Alison has said, there is significant case law surrounding fees and the setting of them, and each local authority will have to justify what fees they set in accordance with their work. So therefore you will never find a situation where everyone charges exactly the same. And Hemmings really did change
Okay,
Councillor Jones, you want to come back in?
Yes, just very quickly. I mean, I asked that very specifically because as a licensed premising, I might be asking of Torvine while we're charging twice as much as Caerphilly, but then as a councillor I might be asking you, couldn't we charge what Monmouthshire charges because we could do with some income coming in? And if these figures were very, very similar or within a range, then maybe that question wouldn't pass, but there are some very significant discrepancies on there. It may be that Caerphilly have got 10 times the number of premises and therefore they've got a cost benefit, or it could be that Monmouthshire have got half what we have and there's additional costs. But it's just interesting, a member of the public looking at that might draw inferences which aren't accurate. And thank you for your comments.
I think actually you just picked up two very good things there. I think which really do have an impact. I think that those authorities that have, say, twice as many as someone else can have real cost savings. And this is one of the problems that we have where government fix the fees, particularly on the Licensing Act, is that an authority that has 2 or 3 times the number of premises has some real cost savings that they can make in terms of, for instance, the database. Now, if we are paying £10,000 for our database, which is what they cost these days, they're a considerable sum. If I've got 100 licences, or if I've got 1,000 licences, they're paying quite a bit for that. Whereas if somebody's got 5,000 licences, you can see there's already a considerable cost saving to the business, simply because there are more businesses sharing that cost. So this is one of the reasons that we actually dropped our specialist database and went over to another database that's been shared right the way across teams, right the way across different functions, so that we can actually give businesses that cost saving. But if you have a large authority with very few premises in, you're then travelling between them, and the time taken to inspect each one is that much more. So all of these things come in, and it's something that has to be considered on an authority-by-authority basis. They may be doing things in a different way, they may be doing it to a different standard that they feel is appropriate for their area. And I think that's going to be the importance factor that has to be taken in here. We are doing what we feel is appropriate, and I would say that I have been fairly robust in identifying what we can charge for that fairly for the businesses. There's nothing there that I wouldn't feel that isn't fair if I was paying that. And that's what I've tried to achieve.
Okay. Councillor Parish, you want to come in?
I was going to bring up exactly the same thing as Nick, because Caerphilly are considerably lower than Torvine. But you did say the distance that has to be travelled, to inspect these, makes a difference. But Caerphilly is a very large area. So it's probably because they've got more of these premises and it makes it cheaper. But really, then, we're not, comparing like for like. Even if the database has to be taken into consideration, the cost of the computer equipment and that. So it's very baffling, really, how it can be worked out, and compared.
I think that actually looking at Caerphilly, I'm not saying that this is the case, but the fact that they're charging very, very similar things for a number of different areas. This is something that we really picked up on when we looked at English fees for animal establishment licences. And it's something that I've picked up on talking to somebody that actually does some cat sitting for me and was complaining about what she was being charged. That was very different in different areas. And she was complaining that she was being charged for her home boarding licence £50 in one area and £100 in another. And I'm there thinking, well, I'm charging £150 because I don't think that the £220 that I've calculated as an actual cost is fair for a business that will only be licensed for 3 animals at any one time. So I think that there's a lot of authorities out there that have got around the needs to calculate by actually charging so much less than the going rate that they're safe. Okay, so but for an authority like us that has been very robust in terms of well thought out cost recovery, we're getting nearer, the level of, we're over the maximum on some. So I think, and I'm aware that there are some neighbouring authorities that have not come under this pressure to generate income because they're seen as better well-off authorities. Whereas here in Torfaen, I think we've always been very financially astute in making sure that we're aware that we're getting in the income that we can and we're cutting the costs where appropriate so that we remain financially solvent. And I think you are seeing that difference here as well.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Any more questions, members? Comments? No? Okay. So the recommendations are on page 63 of the agenda, 9.1. That the fees and charges detailed in Appendix 1 of the report be approved and have effect from the 1st of August, and that the fees are subsequently reviewed annually. So can I have a mover in a second? Yeah?
With the provision that we alter those two, because
The betting and entertainment's licence is actually 750, not 903, and the betting licence is 600, not 903. Yeah, as it carries forward on Appendix 1. Yeah.
Yes, with those noted.
Okay, so with that being agreed then, if we could have a show of hands. Okay. Right, thank you members. Recommendations are agreed. Agenda item 7, which is the date of the next meeting. The next meeting is due to take place on Thursday, the 7th of October. Is that okay?
11th of October? Is it the 11th?
Yeah, it's Thursday, 11th of October. Okay.
Subject to change.
I think subject to change on that one. I think there's been we've had a lot of discussion around the date of the next meeting, simply because we have to bring before you the gambling policy consultation for your consideration. But we then need to report that to council, I understand. So we're going to be on a very, very tight time frame for that. We've got to bring that gambling report to you at early October, but we may not have the quarterly report fully ready and with all of the data ready to come round to you. So we're going to see how that works and what information we can bring to you at that time.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your comprehensive report, Alison. I'd like to thank members for attending the meeting, and I'd like to close the meeting.